What happens when a gate agent drunk on a tiny sliver of power makes the worst decision of her life? At New York's JFK Airport, Brenda Gable stood as the self-appointed guardian of Aura Airlines Flight 110 to London, when she saw 19-year-old black twins Maya and Jordan Vance holding first-class tickets. She saw fraud, not paying customers. She sneered, she accused, and she denied them entry, calling the police to have them removed. What Brenda didn't know was that the name on their tickets, Vance, wasn't just a name. It was the name of the man who built Aura Airlines from a single plane into a global empire. She wasn't just grounding 2 passengers, she was grounding the children of the man who signed her paycheck. This isn't a story about a simple mistake. It's a story about prejudice, power, and the devastating, life-altering karma that followed. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. The rolling clatter of suitcases on polished floors, the staccato announcements of final boarding calls, the murmur of a dozen languages blending into a single, anxious hum. For 19-year-old twins Maya and Jordan Vance, it was just background noise. They were seasoned travelers, having spent their childhoods hopping between their father's home in New York and their mother's in London. Today's trip, however, felt different. It was the end of a long summer spent with their father, and the familiar pang of saying goodbye was still fresh. They navigated the throng with an easy grace, their matching designer carry-ons a silent testament to their privilege. Maya, with her hair in intricate braids that fell past her shoulders, walked with a purposeful stride, her phone already cued with a playlist for the flight. Jordan, her identical counterpart, save for a pair of stylish, thick-rimmed glasses, was more reserved, his eyes scanning the departure board with a quiet intensity. They were young, they were black, and they were flying first class on Aura Airlines. Flight 110 to London Heathrow. In their world, this was perfectly normal. They arrived at Gate B24 to find a line already snaking back from the podium. At the helm of the operation was a woman whose name tag read Brenda Gable. She was a woman in her late 40s with a tight blonde bun and a posture so rigid it seemed to defy gravity. Her face was set in a permanent state of strained disapproval, as if the very existence of so many travelers was a personal affront. She barked orders at passengers, snatching passports and scanning boarding passes with a flick of the wrist that bordered on aggressive. When it was the twins' turn, Maya stepped forward and offered a polite smile. "Hi, how are you?" Brenda didn't look up from her screen. "Passports and boarding passes," she commanded, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. Maya slid the documents across the counter. Brenda picked them up, her eyes flicking from the passports to the twins, then back again. A small, almost imperceptible frown tightened her lips. She scanned Maya's pass. Beep, then Jordan's. Beep. But she didn't hand them back. Instead, she tapped a long, manicured finger on the screen, her frown deepening. "There seems to be a problem with these tickets," she said, her voice now carrying a distinct, accusatory edge. Jordan leaned forward slightly. "A problem is the flight overbooked." Brenda finally lifted her head, and her eyes, a pale, cold blue, raked over them. She took in their expensive sneakers, their tailored travel clothes, the quiet confidence in their posture. What she saw, however, was not what was there. Her mind, clouded by years of unspoken biases, painted a different picture. "These are first-class tickets," she stated, as if this were a clue in a criminal investigation. "Yes, they are." Maya replied, her polite smile beginning to feel strained. "Is there an issue with that?" "It's highly unusual." Brenda continued, her voice loud enough for the people behind them in line to hear. These tickets were booked with a premium unlimited mileage account, the Founders Circle account. We get a flag for unusual activity on these accounts, especially for last-minute international bookings. Jordan's brow furrowed. They weren't last minute. They were booked 3 months ago. My system is telling me otherwise, Brenda snapped, turning the monitor slightly so they couldn't see it. I need to see the credit card used to purchase these tickets. A knot of unease began to form in Maya's stomach. This was more than standard procedure. It was an interrogation. Our father booked the tickets, she said, keeping her voice even. They're booked from the main company account. It's always done this way. The mention of father and company account only seemed to fuel Brenda's suspicion. A smirk played on her lips. Of course, and I'll need to see his ID and his credit card. He's not here, Jordan said, his patience wearing thin. He dropped us off. We fly this route all the time. You can check our travel history. My name is Jordan Vance. This is my sister Maya Vance. It's all in the system. Brenda let out a short, derisive laugh. Oh, I'm sure it is. Look, I've seen this scam 100 times. Stolen account numbers, forged identities. This is a $24,000 transaction. You can't seriously expect me to believe that 2 teenagers just happened to be flying to London in our most exclusive seats. The word teenagers was laced with venom, but the unspoken word hung heavier in the air. Black. The subtext was clear. People like you don't belong here. The passengers behind them were shifting, whispering. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at Maya's skin. Her composure, carefully maintained, began to crack. Are you accusing us of stealing? Maya's voice was low, but it vibrated with a sudden cold fury. I'm not accusing you of anything, Brenda said, her voice dripping with false innocence. I'm just doing my job, protecting the airline's assets, and a Founders Circle account is our biggest asset. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss. Why don't you two just admit you got these tickets from a friend, and we can avoid making a bigger scene? Jordan was stunned into silence. He had encountered racism before, subtle slights, condescending remarks, but never anything this blatant, this public. It was like a physical blow. Maya, however, found her voice. We're not going anywhere. Those are our seats, on our airline. We have our passports, our boarding passes. They are valid. You have no right to hold us here and accuse us of being criminals. Brenda's face hardened into a mask of righteous indignation. She relished this. The confrontation, the power she held to grant or deny passage, to put these arrogant kids in their place. You have a nice attitude, you know that, she sneered. Well, your attitude isn't getting you on this plane. As the lead gate agent for this flight, I have the final say on who boards and who doesn't. For security reasons, I am denying you boarding. She picked up their passports, and boarding passes, slid them into a clear plastic folder, and placed it pointedly under her counter out of their reach. You are not getting on this flight, she declared, her voice ringing with an ice-cold finality that echoed through the now silent gate area. Step aside, you're holding up the line. The world seemed to shrink to the space around the podium at gate B24. The ambient noise of the airport faded, replaced by the thudding of Maya's own heart. Brenda Gable had turned away from them, already calling for the next passenger with a saccharine-sweet voice that was a jarring contrast to the venom she had just spit at them. Next in line, please. But Maya and Jordan didn't move. They stood rooted to the spot, a mixture of shock fury and deep, painful humiliation washing over them. People in the queue stared, some with pity. others with suspicion, their expressions confirming Brenda's narrative before a single fact was established. They were guilty until proven innocent. "Ma'am," Jordan said, his voice shaking slightly despite his efforts to control it. "You can't just keep our passports. You have to give them back to us." Brenda ignored him, her focus entirely on the new set of documents in her hand. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Henderson." "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice louder this time, cutting through the agent's feigned indifference. "We are not moving until you return our passports and let us on this plane." This public defiance seemed to snap something in Brenda. Her professional facade crumbled completely. She slammed her hand on the counter, making the passenger she was serving jump. "I told you to step aside," she shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. "You are being disruptive. If you do not leave the gate area immediately, I will have you removed by Port Authority police." The threat hung in the air, thick and menacing. The idea of being escorted out of an airport by police, of being treated like criminals, was a nightmare scenario. For a moment, Jordan considered pulling his sister away, or just retreating and dealing with the fallout later. But then he looked at Maya's face. Her expression wasn't one of fear. It was one of cold, unyielding resolve. She had her father's spine. "Then call them," Maya said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Call the police. And while you're at it, you might want to call your supervisor, because you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career." Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," Maya shot back. With a dramatic huff, Brenda picked up the phone at her station. "Yes, this is Brenda Gable at Gate B24. I need a supervisor and Port Authority. I have two individuals causing a disturbance and refusing to leave." She emphasized the word individuals with a sneer, as if passengers was a title they hadn't earned. Within minutes, a man in a slightly too tight Aura Airlines suit arrived. His name tag read, "David Brown, Terminal Operations Manager." He had the weary, harried look of a man who spent his days putting out fires. He listened to Brenda's animated one-sided account, nodding along as she painted the twins as aggressive, suspicious, and potentially dangerous. He turned to Maya and Jordan, his expression a carefully neutral mask that did little to hide his desire for the problem to simply vanish. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice placating. "I'm David Brown. Brenda tells me there's some confusion about your tickets." "There's no confusion," Jordan explained, trying to remain calm and rational. "There is prejudice. Your agent has accused us of fraud, confiscated our passports, and refused our valid first-class boarding passes based on nothing but her own assumptions about how we look." David Brown sighed, running a hand over his face. He glanced at Brenda, who stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant look on her face. In his mind, the calculation was simple: side with the long-time employee or with the two teenagers causing a scene. He chose the path of least resistance. "Listen," he said, directing his words to the twins. "Brenda is one of our most experienced agents. She has the authority to make these judgment calls to protect the airline. If the system flags something, she has to follow protocol. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding that can be sorted out, but not here, not now. The flight is closing." He was dismissing them, condescending to them. It was a corporate stonewall designed to make them feel powerless. "The protocol is not to baselessly accuse passengers of being criminals," Maya retorted, her patience gone. "The protocol is not to confiscate legal documents. We've flown this airline hundreds of times. Our father is Elias Vance." She said the name clearly. David Brown's expression didn't change. The name to a mid-level manager at a massive international hub meant nothing. It was just a name. This more than anything demonstrated how insulated they were from the man who had built the very ground they stood on. "That's nice," Brown said dismissively. "But right now, I need you to come with me to the service desk so we don't delay this flight any further." Just then, 2 Port Authority officers arrived, their presence immediately escalating the tension. They were large, imposing figures, and their eyes fell on Jordan and Maya with a practiced, weary suspicion. "What's the problem here?" one of the officers asked. "These 2 were denied boarding and are refusing to leave the gate," Brenda said, her voice taking on a note of victimhood. The officers took a step toward them. This was the precipice. The moment when a misunderstanding becomes an arrest, a headline, a life-altering event. Jordan felt a surge of panic. He looked at Maya, who stood her ground, her chin held high. She simply pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "What are you doing?" Jordan whispered. "What we should have done 10 minutes ago," she replied. She pressed the phone to her ear. It rang twice. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice suddenly losing its hard edge and becoming the voice of a daughter talking to her father. It was calm, almost conversational. "Sorry to bother you. I know you just dropped us off." She paused, listening. The gate area was dead silent. The officers, the manager, even Brenda were all watching this girl make her phone call. "Yeah, we're still at the gate," Maya continued. "There's a bit of a problem. They're not letting us board." "Yes, first class. The gate agent, her name is Brenda. She says our tickets are fraudulent. She took our passports. Now her manager, David Brown, is here with the Port Authority police. No, we showed them everything. They just don't believe us." Another pause. The air was thick with suspense. "Okay," Maya said softly. "Yes, he's right here." She held the phone out to the manager, David Brown. "My father wants to speak with you." Brown scoffed, an incredulous smile on his face. "I'm not talking to your father. This is a security matter." "I really think you should," Maya said, her eyes boring into his. "He says to tell you that if you don't take this phone, his next call will be to Frank Miller." Frank Miller, head of North American operations for Aura Airlines, David Brown's boss's boss's boss, a name that was practically legendary within the company. Brown's condescending smile faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. How would these kids know that name? He hesitated for a second too long. Maya spoke into the phone again. "He's refusing, Dad. Okay, hold on." She looked back at Brown. "He wants me to ask you one more time. He said to tell you his name is Elias Vance." Silence. David Brown's face went from pink to white. The name clicked. Not just a name on a ticket. The name. Elias Vance. The founder. The majority shareholder. The visionary who started Aura with 2 leased aircraft and built it into a titan of the industry. The man whose portrait hung in the corporate headquarters in Dallas. The man whose signature was metaphorically on every single plane uniform and paycheck. Brenda Gable, standing beside him, heard the name, and her blood ran cold. The smug, triumphant expression on her face dissolved into sheer, unadulterated horror. She looked at the 2 teenagers she had just accused of being common thieves, the 2 faces she had sneered at, and she finally saw them for who they were. David Brown. His hand, trembling, slowly reached out and took the phone from Maya. "Hello," he stammered. "Mr. Vance, sir." He listened for a moment, his face growing paler with every passing second. He began to sweat, his eyes darting around the gate area, as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "Yes, sir," he whispered into the phone. "I understand, sir. Right away, sir." "Yes, sir," I am so sorry, sir. He handed the phone back to Maya, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He turned to the Port Authority officers. My apologies, officers, he said, his voice a choked squeak. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, a system error. Everything is fine. Your presence is no longer required. The officers, sensing the colossal shift in power, gave a curt nod and walked away. David Brown then turned to Brenda Gable, his face a mask of cold fury. All his previous weariness was gone, replaced by the panicked energy of a man trying to save his career. Brenda, he hissed, his voice low and trembling with rage. Give them their passports. Now! Upgrade them to Global First suites. Apologize to them. And then go to my office and wait for me. Don't speak to anyone. Don't touch anything. Just wait. Brenda, looking like she had seen a ghost, fumbled under the counter, her hands shaking as she retrieved the plastic folder. She avoided looking at the twins, at the faces of the two people whose lives she had just upended, and in doing so had destroyed her own. On the tarmac, the pilot of the Boeing 787, Dreamliner, already given the green light for pushback, received a frantic, unprecedented call from the control tower. Aura 110, hold your position at the gate. I repeat, hold your position. Do not move. The owner is on the phone. The atmosphere at Gate B24 had undergone a seismic shift. The quiet whispers of the other passengers had morphed into gaping stares. They had all been first-hand witnesses to a spectacular fall from grace, a real-time drama, where the roles of antagonist and protagonist had been violently inverted. The two young black teenagers moments ago, treated as criminals, were now the undeniable center of power. Brenda Gable, her face ashen, held out the passports. Her hands were trembling so badly that the documents rattled against the metal counter. I am so sorry. She stammered the words, sounding hollow and foreign in her own ears. She couldn't bring herself to meet their eyes. Her gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over their shoulders, as if looking at the ghost of her now dead career. Maya took the passports without a word. There was no triumph in her expression, only a profound, weary sadness. This whole ugly affair could have been avoided with a shred of decency, a simple dose of respect. David Brown, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of frantic, obsequious energy. Miss Vance, Mr. Vance, please right this way. We have the Global First suites ready for you. Let me personally escort you onto the aircraft. Can I get you anything? Water, champagne. Please allow me to take your bags. He was practically bowing. It was a pathetic display, and it only made the twins feel more alienated. Jordan shook his head. We can carry our own bags, thank you. As they were personally escorted down the jet bridge, bypassing the remaining queue, the silence they left behind was deafening. Every eye was on Brenda Gable. She stood frozen behind the podium, the focal point of 100 silent judgments. Her colleague, a younger agent who had been handling the economy line, cautiously approached her. Brenda, are you okay? Brenda didn't answer. She was staring at the empty doorway through which the Vances had disappeared. At that moment, she was replaying every decision she had made in the last 20 minutes. The initial flicker of suspicion, the condescending tone, the thrill of power as she denied them boarding, the sheer arrogant certainty that she was right. And it all came crashing down with a single name, Elias Vance, a name she knew, a name every Aura Airlines employee knew. But she had never in her wildest nightmares connected that corporate, almost mythical name with the two teenagers standing before her. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from David Brown. Stay in my office. Do not leave. The flight to London was for Maya and Jordan surreal. They were cocooned in the unimaginable luxury of the Global First Suite's private pods with lie-flat beds, massive entertainment screens, and a flight attendant who catered to their every whim with a nervous, almost reverent respect. The chief purser, a kind-faced man named Arthur, had come to apologize personally on behalf of the entire crew. News had traveled through the aircraft at lightning speed. They were no longer just passengers. They were royalty. But the luxury felt tainted. The champagne tasted bitter. Maya stared out the window at the clouds, the ugly scene replaying in her mind. It wasn't about the seats or the delay or the inconvenience. It was about the cold, hard reality of being judged on sight, of having your worth, your very legitimacy questioned because the color of your skin didn't fit someone's preconceived notion of wealth and success. She thought we were nothing, Maya said quietly to Jordan, her reflection a ghostly image in the triple-paned glass. She looked right through us and saw two kids who didn't belong. Jordan adjusted his glasses. It's not the first time. It won't be the last. But it shouldn't be this way, Jordan, she insisted, her voice rising with passion. Not anywhere, and especially not here, not in Dad's house. Their father had built Aura Airlines on a bedrock principle. Every passenger from the last row of economy to the front of first class is a guest in our home. Treat them with dignity. It was written on the first page of the employee handbook. It was the core of the company's ethos. Brenda Gable hadn't just insulted two passengers. She had desecrated the founding principle of the entire corporation. Back in New York, the fallout was swift and brutal. By the time Flight 110 reached cruising altitude over the Atlantic, Frank Miller, the head of North American operations, was in a car speeding towards JFK. He had been in a board meeting when his personal cell phone, the one reserved for his family, and his CEO had buzzed with a name that made his stomach clench: Elias Vance. The conversation had been short, calm, and utterly terrifying. Elias Vance never raised his voice. He didn't have to. His quiet disappointment was more powerful than any tirade. He recounted the story his daughter had told him, his voice devoid of emotion, which only made the details more chilling. He didn't issue threats or demands. He simply ended the call with 7 words. "Frank, I trust you'll handle this." Handling it began with a phone call to David Brown, who was waiting in his office, pacing like a caged animal. Brenda Gable sat numbly in a chair in the corner, her world having shrunk to the 4 beige walls of the room. Frank Miller's voice over the speakerphone was like a winter storm. "David, walk me through what happened, and do not leave out a single detail." David, his voice trembling, recounted the events, trying desperately to frame himself as a mediator, a de-escalator. But the facts were damning. He had sided with his employee. He had failed to listen. He had dismissed the name Vance. When he was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "David," Frank finally said, his voice dangerously low, "you are suspended effective immediately. Hand your badge and airport credentials to airport security. A full investigation into your conduct will begin tomorrow morning. Do you understand?" "Frank, it was a chaotic situation," David stammered. "Do you understand?" Frank repeated the words like chips of ice. Yes, I understand. Now put Brenda Gable on the phone." David handed the phone to Brenda. Her hand was slick with sweat as she took it. "This is Brenda Gable." "Brenda," Frank Miller's voice said, devoid of any preamble. "You have been an employee with this airline for 19 years. In 20 minutes, you managed to single-handedly betray every single value we stand for. Your employment with Aura Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your final paycheck and severance details will be couriered to your home. It was clinical, brutal, final. There was no room for appeal. But my record, she began, the words catching in her throat. 19 years, Your record is irrelevant, Frank cut her off. You publicly humiliated and discriminated against the children of the man who founded this company. What you did wasn't just an HR violation, Brenda. It was an existential attack on who we are. Consider yourself lucky that Mr. Vance is a man of principle, because if he were not, we would be having a very different conversation involving our legal department. The line went dead. Brenda sat in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. Terminated. After 19 years of service. 19 years of early mornings, late nights dealing with irate passengers and navigating a high-stress environment. All of it was gone. Erased in a moment of ugly, thoughtless prejudice. 2 airport security guards appeared at the door. They didn't have to say a word. Their presence was enough. Slowly, like a woman in a trance, Brenda Gable stood up. She collected her purse, leaving behind a half-eaten sandwich and a framed photo of her and her husband on her desk. As she was escorted through the back corridors of the airport, the same hallways she had walked with authority for nearly 2 decades, she was just another person, stripped of her badge, her title, and her dignity. When she stepped out of the terminal and into the humid New York night, the reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was 58 years old, unemployed, and had just been fired in the most humiliating way imaginable. And as she would soon discover, her nightmare was only just beginning. The world moves at the speed of social media. Before Aura Flight 110 had even landed at Heathrow, the story was already exploding online. A passenger at gate B24, a business blogger named Liam Brown, had discreetly filmed the entire confrontation on his phone, from Brenda's initial accusations to David Brown's panicked capitulation after the phone call. He posted the 10-minute video to Twitter with a simple caption, "Unbelievable scene at JFK. At Aura Airlines gate agent denies boarding to 2 young black passengers in first class, accuses them of fraud, and calls police." Plot twist. Their father owns the airline. Watch this. The post detonated. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By morning, it was over 50 million. Aura Airlines, #Brenda, the gate agent, and #Elias Vance were trending worldwide. The video was raw, undeniable, and infuriating. Every news outlet in the world picked it up. CNN, BBC, Reuters. They all ran segments dissecting the footage frame by frame. Brenda Gable's face, contorted in a mask of smug authority, was plastered across every screen. Her words, laced with condescension and prejudice, were quoted and analyzed by pundits and social justice advocates. For Aura Airlines, it was a public relations catastrophe of the highest order. The company Elias Vance had built on the promise of dignity and service was now the global face of corporate racism. The stock price took an immediate punishing hit, dropping 8% at the opening bell. Elias Vance was a man who famously avoided the spotlight. He was a builder, an innovator, not a celebrity. He rarely gave interviews, and his public image was one of quiet, formidable competence. But this incident involving his own children forced his hand. He couldn't remain silent. He sat down with his wife Serafina in the study of their New York home. Serafina Vance was as brilliant and driven as her husband. A former human rights attorney, she had retired from law to manage the family's extensive philanthropic endeavors. She had listened to the story from a distraught Maya and a quiet, contemplative Jordan upon their arrival in London. Her reaction was not one of rage, but of a cold, focused determination. "This isn't just about one employee, Elias," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This woman, Brenda, is a symptom of a larger disease, a disease you've spent your life fighting. Complacency, prejudice, the casual abuse of minor power. Firing her is not enough. Firing her manager is not enough." Elias looked at the portrait of his children on the mantelpiece. They were smiling, bright-eyed, full of the limitless potential he had worked his entire life to provide them. The thought of that light being dimmed by such ugly, casual bigotry filled him with a pain deeper than any business loss. "What do you propose, Sarah?" he asked. "We make this a lesson," she replied, "a permanent institutional lesson. We use this moment to force real change, not just at Aura, but as an example for everyone. We need to create something that addresses the root cause of what happened at that gate." The next day, Aura Airlines released 2 official statements. The first was a public apology written not by a PR team, but by Elias Vance himself. It was published as a full-page ad in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. It was direct, sincere, and unflinching. "To my children, and to every person who has ever been made to feel they do not belong, I am sorry," it began. "Yesterday, my own children were victims of a deep and painful prejudice at the hands of an employee of the company I built. This failure is not just hers, it is mine. It shows that the values I hoped to instill in this company have not been strong enough to overcome the biases that still plague our society. We will do better. I will do better." The second announcement was far more shocking. Aura Airlines announced it was creating a new independent foundation, the Vance Initiative for Dignity and Equity. The foundation would be seeded with a $100 million grant directly from Aura Airlines, a penalty Elias Vance was imposing on his own company. Its mission would be twofold. First, to fund comprehensive mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training programs, not just for Aura, but for the entire airline and service industry. Second, it would provide grants and legal aid to individuals who had been victims of discrimination in public spaces. The initiative would be chaired by Serafina Vance. The move was a masterstroke. It transformed a PR disaster into a powerful statement of accountability. It recentered the narrative from the airline's failure to its founders' commitment to fixing the problem. The stock price began to recover. Pundits praised the Vances for their leadership. But for one woman in Queens, New York, this grand public act of corporate atonement was just noise. Brenda Gable was living in the eye of the storm. Her name and face were everywhere. She had become a meme, a villain in a global drama. Her social media was flooded with hateful messages. Reporters camped outside her modest, semi-detached house. She and her husband, Mark, had to keep the blinds drawn day and night. "They're making me out to be a monster," Brenda sobbed to her husband one evening, scrolling through the vicious comments on her phone. "I'm not a racist. I made a mistake." Mark Gable, a quiet man, whose face was etched with the chronic pain of a long-term illness, wrapped an arm around her. "I know, Bren. I know." But did she know? In the quiet, lonely hours of the night, Brenda was forced to confront the truth. She had always seen herself as a good person, a hard-working woman just trying to get by. But the video didn't lie. The sneer on her face, the dismissive wave of her hand, the undisguised contempt in her voice, it was all there. She had judged those kids instantly. She had enjoyed the power she held over them. The ugliness she saw on that screen was a part of her she had never been willing to admit existed. The official termination letter arrived by courier. It was cold and legalistic. It outlined the reasons for her dismissal. Gross misconduct, including discriminatory behavior and violation of the company's core principles of customer dignity. It also informed her that, due to the nature of her termination, she was not entitled to the standard severance package. Her health insurance, the premium plan she had relied on for 19 years, would expire at the end of the month. That last part was the sentence that truly terrified her. Mark suffered from a rare autoimmune disorder, a form of vasculitis that required a cocktail of incredibly expensive immunosuppressant drugs and regular infusions. Her job at Aura and its top-tier PPO insurance plan was the only thing keeping them afloat. Without it, the cost of his medication was more than their mortgage. The karma that had come for Brenda Gable was not just public shame. It was a looming financial and medical catastrophe that threatened to destroy everything she had. The weeks that followed the incident at JFK were a slow, agonizing descent for Brenda Gable. The viral storm eventually moved on to new outrages, but the damage to her life was permanent. She was a pariah. When she tried applying for jobs, other airlines, airport services, even retail positions at the mall, the interviews would go well until the hiring manager would get a thoughtful, slightly pitying look on their face. "Wait a minute," one of them said, looking up from her resume. "Brenda Gable, you're the..." from the airport video. The question was always followed by a polite but firm rejection. She was unemployable. Her name was now synonymous with a very public, very ugly form of bigotry. No corporation would risk the backlash of hiring Brenda the gate agent. Their savings, modest to begin with, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. The first prescription refill for Mark's medication after her insurance lapsed came to over $9,000 for a 1-month supply. They paid for it with a credit card, a temporary fix that felt more like signing their own financial death warrant. The strain settled over their small house like a physical presence. The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken fears. Mark, whose health had been stable for years, began to decline under the stress. The physical symptoms of his vasculitis, joint pain, fatigue, skin lesions flared up with a vengeance. He saw the toll this was taking on Brenda, the way she barely ate the dark circles that were a permanent fixture under her eyes, and his own sense of helplessness ate away at him. "This is my fault," he said one evening, his voice raspy with pain as Brenda helped him adjust the pillows on the couch. "If I wasn't sick, if my medicine wasn't so expensive..." "Don't you dare say that!" Brenda snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "This isn't your fault, it's mine. All of it." She retreated to the kitchen, leaning against the counter and squeezing her eyes shut. She was drowning, and with every passing day, the water was rising higher. She had spent so many nights trying to justify her actions, blaming the Vance kids for being arrogant, blaming the airline for its high-pressure environment, blaming the world for being too sensitive. But those justifications were like sandcastles against a rising tide. The truth was, her life was collapsing because of a choice she had made. A choice born of a lifetime of tiny, unexamined prejudices. The assumption that the black man in her neighborhood was a delivery driver, not the owner of the house. The slight clutch of her purse when a group of Latino teenagers walked past. The quiet satisfaction she felt when she was right about someone not belonging. These were the small, ugly bricks that had built the wall of her own prison. She just hadn't seen it until she was trapped inside. Her desperation led her to dark places. She spent hours online reading articles about the Vance family, trying to understand the people she had wronged. She learned about Elias Vance's journey, the son of a Pullman porter who had earned an engineering degree at night while working as a baggage handler. He had faced down racist investors and skeptical bankers to build his empire. He had named his first plane the Serafina, after his wife. Brenda read about Serafina Vance's pro bono work, defending asylum seekers and victims of wrongful convictions. She saw photos of the twins, Maya and Jordan, volunteering at a youth center in Harlem. These were not the spoiled, arrogant caricatures she had imagined. They were a family of substance, of principle, and she had tried to tear them down with a sneer and an abuse of her minimal authority. The shame was a physical ache in her chest. One afternoon, Mark suffered a particularly bad flare-up. His breathing became shallow, and a frightening spiderweb-like rash bloomed across his skin. Brenda had to call an ambulance. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor was blunt. "His inflammation markers are through the roof," the doctor said, her face grim. "He's missed his last 2 infusion treatments and it shows. The disease is attacking his blood vessels again. We need to get him on a high-dose steroid regimen and restart the infusions immediately, or we risk systemic organ damage. We're talking about kidneys, lungs. We can't afford it." Brenda whispered the words, tasting like ash. "Our insurance is gone." The doctor gave her a sympathetic look and handed her a pamphlet. "Talk to the hospital's financial aid department. There are state programs, charitable foundations. You might qualify for assistance." That night, Brenda sat at her dimly lit kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of medical bills and insurance forms. She felt like she was at the absolute bottom of a deep, dark well. She opened her laptop and began searching for charitable foundations that helped with catastrophic medical expenses. She typed in vasculitis treatment grants and autoimmune disorder financial aid. The search results populated the screen, and there near the top of the first page was a name that made her heart stop: the Vance Initiative for Dignity and Equity. She clicked the link, her hand trembling. The website was sleek and professional. The homepage featured a photo of Elias and Serafina Vance smiling warmly. The Our mission statement read, "To provide support to those failed by systemic inequities, whether through discrimination or a healthcare system that places profit over people, we believe in the fundamental dignity of every individual." Under the Programs tab, there was a section for catastrophic medical grants. It was a new program designed to help families who, through job loss or inadequate insurance, were facing financial ruin due to a medical crisis. The application form was available as a PDF download. It was a cruel cosmic joke. The only potential lifeline in her entire world was being offered by the very family whose lives she had so carelessly upended. To apply would be the ultimate act of humiliation. She would have to write down her story, her financial hardship, her husband's illness, and send it to them. To Serafina Vance. Her first instinct was to slam the laptop shut. Her pride, the same stubborn, misguided pride that had caused this mess, screamed at her to refuse. Never. I would rather starve. But then she looked over at the living room, where Mark was sleeping fitfully on the couch, his breathing shallow. She thought of the doctor's words. Organ damage. This was no longer about her pride. It was about her husband's life. With tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with a toxic cocktail of shame, guilt, and desperation, Brenda Gable downloaded the application form. She would have to beg for mercy from the people to whom she had shown none. The application from the Vance Initiative was a grueling exercise in self-immolation. Every line Brenda filled out felt like another confession. Name, Brenda Gable. Former employer, Aura Airlines. Reason for unemployment. Terminated for gross misconduct. She had to attach tax returns, medical records, and bank statements laying bare the full extent of her financial ruin for the family she had wronged. The most difficult part was the personal statement. Staring at the blank box, she finally chose a brutal, unvarnished honesty, knowing that any excuse would be seen for the lie it was. She didn't soften the truth. She described the events at Gate B24, admitting to her baseless assumptions, her abuse of power, and the deep, consuming shame she now felt. She concluded with a simple, desperate plea. "I know I am the last person on earth who deserves your help," she wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't ask for it. But my husband is a good man who has done nothing wrong, and my actions have put his life in jeopardy. If there is any way your foundation can help him, I will spend the rest of my life trying to repay the kindness." She mailed the thick envelope, an act of pure desperation she expected to be met with silence. For weeks, that's all there was. The bills piled higher. Mark's condition worsened. Then one afternoon, a crisp, cream-colored envelope arrived. The embossed logo read, "The Vance Initiative." Brenda's hands shook so badly, she could barely open it. It wasn't a rejection. It was an invitation, a summons to meet with the Foundation's chairperson, Serafina Vance, in person. "I can't go," she whispered to Mark that night, sliding the letter across the table. He read it slowly. "You have to go, Bren," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You asked for this. You have to see it through. Just tell her the truth." A week later, Brenda rode the subway into a world she no longer belonged to. She wore her only decent suit, now slightly too big for her. The offices of the Vance Initiative were on the 50th floor, a cathedral of glass and steel, with breathtaking views of Central Park. It was a silent, opulent world that hummed with quiet power. An assistant led her down a hallway to a corner office where Serafina Vance sat waiting behind a large mahogany desk. She was even more striking in person, tall and graceful, with intelligent, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through Brenda's carefully constructed composure. Her expression was one of complete, unnerving neutrality. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Miss Gable," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Brenda sat, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. The silence in the room was absolute. Serafina folded her hands on the desk. Brenda's application file was in front of her, but she didn't look at it. Her eyes were fixed on Brenda. "I've read your file." She began, her tone professional, almost detached. "My foundation exists to help those harmed by systemic failures. On paper, your husband Mark is a perfect candidate for our assistance. He is a man facing a life-threatening illness who has been failed by a healthcare system that ties survival to employment." A tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in Brenda's chest. "However," Serafina said, and the single word extinguished it instantly. "There is the unique context of your situation. You lost your job as a direct result of a conscious and deliberate act of prejudice directed at my children." She leaned forward slightly, a cold, sharp anger entering her eyes. "So before we can even consider your application, I need to understand. I want you to look at me, and I want you to tell me why you did what you did." The question was a surgeon's scalpel demanding nothing less than the truth. Brenda met her eyes, knowing that apologies and excuses were useless. "I don't have a good reason," she began, her voice a raw whisper. "When I saw your children, I saw a story I had already written in my own head. I saw them with their expensive clothes and their first-class tickets, and my mind just rejected it. It was easier for me to believe they were criminals than to believe they were worthy." Tears welled, but she forced them back. "I had a little bit of power, and I used it to feel bigger, to put them down, to lift myself up. It was ugly, and it was racist. I didn't think I was Mrs. Vance. I really didn't. But what I did, there's no other word for it. I did it because of a sickness in my own thinking, and it cost me everything." The confession was complete. Serafina was silent for a full minute, her gaze unwavering. "My husband, Elias," she finally said, "started Aura Airlines with one leased plane. On one of his first flights, a wealthy white passenger refused to board because he wouldn't fly with a black pilot. Elias almost went bankrupt that week because of that man's prejudice. He built his entire company so his children would never have to feel that sting. And in his own airline, you became that person on the tarmac. You threw his life's work back in his children's faces." Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. "I know." Brenda choked out, tears now streaming down her face. Serafina stood and walked to the vast window. "My board has reviewed your case. Based on the financial and medical need, they have voted to approve a full grant to cover the cost of Mark Gable's medical treatments for the next 2 years. Brenda gasped, a wave of relief, so powerful it almost made her dizzy. "Oh, thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, I am not finished," Serafina said, turning back, her expression hard as stone. "The grant comes with conditions. This is not a gift. It is a contract. True karma. Ms. Gable is not about punishment. It is about restoration. It is about being forced to rebuild what you have broken." She slid a document across the desk. "My husband's company paid $100 million to fund this initiative. You will pay us back with your time. You are required to complete 500 hours of mandatory community service. You will not be sorting cans in a food bank. You will be assigned to work with newly arrived refugees and at-risk youth. You will spend your hours face-to-face with people whose stories you do not know. You will listen to them. You will help them. You will learn." Her eyes locked onto Brenda's. "Furthermore, you will attend mandatory racial bias counseling with a therapist of my choosing twice a month for the duration of the grant. You will do the hard work of digging out the roots of the prejudice you so casually inflicted on my children. You will report on your progress to me, in this office, every 3 months." It was a staggering proposition. Charity as a prison sentence, a forced re-education. If you miss a single session, if you fail to complete your hours, the funding will be terminated immediately. We will pay for your husband's life, Ms. Gable. In return, you will fundamentally change yours. That is the deal." Brenda stared at the document. This was hard karma. It wasn't poverty or public scorn. It was being forced to confront the worst parts of herself day after day, until she became someone better. For someone like the old Brenda, this was a far harsher sentence than simple failure. It was an act of profound, almost cruel grace. With a trembling hand, Brenda Gable picked up the pen. "I accept," she said, her voice clear for the first time that day. "I'll do it." She signed the contract, her signature, a testament to a life irrevocably broken, and a future she was now bound to rebuild one painful, humbling hour at a time. So what is the real life lesson in the story of Brenda Gable and the Vance family? It's that our actions, especially those born from prejudice, create ripples we can't possibly predict. Brenda's split-second decision to abuse her power didn't just impact 2 teenagers. It set off a chain reaction that destroyed her life, threatened her husband's, and ultimately led her to a reckoning she never could have imagined. This story isn't just about the spectacular karma of a gate agent taking on the billionaire who owned the airline. It's a deeper story about accountability. The Vances could have sought simple revenge, but instead, they chose a more difficult path, restorative justice. They demonstrated that true power isn't about crushing your enemies, but about forcing them to confront the truth and rebuild from the ashes. It reminds us all that every interaction, every judgment we make has weight and consequence. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about justice, karma, and the human condition. What do you think of the conditions Serafina Vance imposed? Let me know in the comments below.